This is the Roller Coaster Podcast, and I'm your host, Lucy Q. Life is a wild ride. It has twists and turns. It's scary, exciting, and downright fun. So throw your head back, arms in the air, and come along with me for the ride.
Life is like a roller coaster, baby, baby. I wanna ride.
From the time that boys are little, they're conditioned by society that they have to be brave and strong, that they have to be the providers and protectors of their wives, girlfriends, and partners. Yet as women, we want them to also be soft and nurturing and to talk about their feelings. Brene Brown is the expert on vulnerability and talks extensively on the subject. Yet society still hasn't given men the space to explore their own vulnerability. Joining me today is Di Manuel to share how we can help the men in our lives, be more vulnerable. Welcome to the roller coaster, Di.
I'm strapping in right now. It's great to be here, Lucy. I appreciate that. That's a great introduction too. I mean, it really sets the stage for what we'll talk about today. So thank you for that, and thanks for the opportunity to connect with you and your audience. It's wonderful.
My pleasure. And as a mother and wife, I have two adult sons, and I have a husband. And vulnerability, I don't think we've ever sort of really identified the subject, or I haven't identified the subject with our boys. We just always talk about everything all the time. But it was a topic that came up with my husband. I don't even remember how it came about, but he looked at me and he says, "Look, you don't understand. The world wants us to be brave. From the time we're 6, 7, 8 years old, we're told that we have to be brave and strong. So how do I even begin to open up and to be vulnerable when, I'm 50 plus years, I've never been allowed to do that?"
It's very valid, your husband's position or his thought process around that. And I align with that very much so, at least how I was before. And because you're right, we often think about the person that we become, or we're constantly becoming, is influenced a lot by external forces, right? And like the people we associate with, the people that raised us, the people that taught us, we have a lot of the behaviors that we pick up ourselves that were role modeled and reinforced by those associations. So, that relationship with the term vulnerability is the one that I'm talking about specifically. Like, what is our initial introduction to the understanding around vulnerability? What was that first strong male role model? And again, I'm speaking from a man's perspective here, right? And I want to be very clear when I'm using this kind of language. I am speaking as a man from a man's perspective. Okay, I identify as a man, and I have 2 daughters, and they're very much in the space of just being very specific around the gender representation. And I want to respect that, as well as I have a number of friends that are non-binary. And anyways, I just wanted to qualify that. So people are listening to this or watching this, the perspective I'm coming from. And, my relationship with vulnerability was such, like a lot of the cliches or stereotypes that are attached to it, I believe that, it was a weakness. It was not a strength. And so this creates this instant conflict, right? Because your husband's saying, like, we got to be brave, we got to be providers, we got to be the hunter gatherers, we got to protect, so we have to put on this facade of being, the protector, the provider, the strong one, right? That doesn't get phased. And yet our belief that's been reinforced is that vulnerability and being brave don't align. They're like polar opposites, but I don't agree with that. And I've come to understand that actually vulnerability is very much a strength for me. But it didn't come with a lot of getting really uncomfortable. Okay, like way outside of my comfort zone, to be able to start opening up, because it was a brand new skill to me. Being able to even share with my daughters or with my wife what was going on internally. about some of the struggles, even if it's my mental health struggles at periods of my life. And just to be able to communicate that, because I could see in my family's eyes, as well as by their actions and their words, that they want to support me, that there's unconditional love and support there. And they want me to be happy. They want me to be in a great place, just the same way I want that for them, you know? And I imagine it's the same for your family, but yet I wasn't able to articulate how I was feeling. So I would get frustrated and angry that, gosh, can't you just figure out what I need and just give me what I need? But I couldn't articulate what I needed because I couldn't articulate what was challenging me, what was holding me back, what were my problems that I was trying to wrestle with. And so if you can't be vulnerable, you can't open up about those things, how do you expect anybody else to be able to help you? Right? Like, how? And so it really got to this point where I was like, gosh, I got to learn some skills here. I got to figure out how to do this. How do I incorporate more vulnerability into my life? And what does that look like? And is there any other men out there that are already doing that or want that same thing? Where are those guys? You know? And so that was sort of this process that I started down many years ago, because I used to struggle with alcohol. I did a TED talk this past spring, and I talked in my talk about just the comfort that I got from alcohol, you know, that double life aspect, because I'm naturally introverted, but I work as an extrovert. So I sort of flop between the two. But I found that if I would drink, I could be anybody I wanted to be. I could talk to anyone. I could show up a certain way, whether that was the true me or not, didn't matter. I was giving off a persona, you know, and until I couldn't keep up with that anymore. And I was about to lose everything. And, 12 years ago, I made a decision, go 1 year without alcohol. That 1 year provided me so much clarity, because I learned in the very first few weeks, I was like, holy smokes, without that crutch, I've got a pretty nasty limp right now. And I don't know how to function. And that was pretty humbling in my early 30s, to come to that realization. Because my circle of influence, my sphere of people that I hung out with the most, especially the men in my life, I mean, we hung out on the 19th hole after we golfed. We went to the pub, we watched UFC. We'd go out after work and drink, we'd ignore our wives when they would text us, where are you? We laugh about it, but that's who I was being role model. So all of a sudden I was like, I want to change, but I know that these people, as the adage goes, I hear from people, it's like, well, why don't you just change the people around you? And I'm like, well, it's not that simple. If you can't change the people around you, it's actually easier to just change the people that are around you. Exactly. So I found new association, and I started to explore, toe in the water, what it's like to be able to start to recognize, but also articulate how I'm feeling, these emotions from a place of trust, and not feeling like, oh my gosh, what I'm sharing right now is going to be used against me, and I'll be honest with you, I found a great psychologist, worked with him for 3 months, found a relationships counselor, worked with her for 4, maybe 5 months. And I did a lot of inner work, and it was amazing. It was eye-opening. So much change happened in that 1 year that it set me on a trajectory that forever changed my life. 12 years later, I'm here talking to you, and I can honestly say to you, Lucy, and those that are listening or watching this, had I not made that commitment, 12 years ago, saying I'm worth making a change, my family's worth me making a change, and then following through with immediate action to do that, and being able to say, I need some help with this because I can't do it on my own. Like, I'd struggled trying to do it on my own for the first 32 years of my life, and that got me only so far. But as soon as I opened up to that, things actually not only got easier, they started to happen even more quickly. Like, it was less resistance and more resiliency. And so that's sort of just a real, snapshot view of how I came to this place of where I like to talk about vulnerability, especially with other men. And I hold space for men, along with a gentleman that co-founded Mentorship Mondays with me when I was living in Bali a few years ago. And now we run these groups online. They're free. Men can tune in on Zoom for all around the world. We got European, we've got Eastern US, we've got Western Canada, we've got one in the EU. Like, it's amazing because there's more men out there that are feeling this way. And they just need a place to go and practice developing the skill of being vulnerable.
And I think now more than ever, vulnerability is bubbling up to the surface. Now tell me, when you were struggling with vulnerability, you said that you saw it as a weakness, but did you see it in a weakness, as a weakness in other people? Because for me, I have struggled with vulnerability. I didn't know how to communicate my feelings, yet I also saw vulnerability as a weakness in myself. But when I saw other people exercising vulnerability, I admired them for it.
Isn't that interesting?
We're odd. Human beings are odd.
You're right, but I mean, it's the motives, right? Like, what's the motive? What's the intention behind being vulnerable? And I think we have to be coming to vulnerability, at least from my own experience. Like, I've realized that I come from vulnerability from a place of, it's not meant to be shock and awe, as Brene Brown says. If you're being vulnerable to create shock, awe, or hey, look at me, or it's there to fluff your ego, that's not real vulnerability. Okay, that is something completely different. But if you're coming from a place of wanting to explore what it's like to be completely raw and real with somebody, and without the fear of judgment, ridicule, or what we're going to say be used against us, that creates a safe space where we can be vulnerable. We can say, like, this is how I'm feeling right now. These are what I'm struggling with. Because until we are able to identify that, how can people help us? Because people do want to help us. And I think we do want to get help too, as long as we don't see getting assistance in areas that we need help isn't a vulnerability in itself, right? And that's, again, a completely different thing. Like, I used to really struggle with asking for help. That was closely tied to my belief systems around being vulnerable, because then it showed weakness. Well, if I need help, it shows that I'm weak.
Yeah.
I'm not self-reliant, right? I'm not Walden-esque. I can't live off a pickaxe in the backwoods. And, so I'm less of a man, right? Like, just amazing what the mind will convince us of.
Yeah. And, as a woman, I can see that, not having all of the answers as a woman, not knowing how to do everything and be everything. And also, there's, as girls, we're sort of raised with this image of perfection. We've all been raised with, depending on, how old you are, whether it's the Brady Bunch, whether it's the Cunninghams, whether it's, what was the family in Growing Pains? It doesn't make a difference what sitcom you grew up watching.
Right.
We were given the structure of, what society believed a family should be, how a wife behaved, how a husband behaved. And there is absolutely no way that you really saw vulnerability in any of that. And, I think women still struggle with vulnerability. It just manifests itself in a different way. Now, so my question to you is, have the men in your groups shared how their wives can or have better supported them in their journey to be more vulnerable?
Well, we're all at different stages, I think, of reestablishing a healthy relationship with vulnerability, and I do feel that it's a skill to some extent. It takes practice. Like, the more you do it, the more comfortable you become with it. And it doesn't mean that you have to be vulnerable with everybody, right? Like, I don't like to be vulnerable for the sake of being vulnerable. Like, who's that serve, right? Like, is it really because it's self-serving, or, like, again, it comes back to what's our intentions behind being vulnerable, just sharing that piece of information. Are we looking for empathy, sympathy, pity? Like, for me, and for what I've noticed with a lot of men, it's just having, many of us, what I hear is that, and what I hear all the time is, guys will come to the call, we do it on Mondays, and they'll come. And one of the comments we get, because we always do a round robin at the end, hey, what are you taking away? Or what's the intention you're taking into the week? Those types of questions, just to really set things in motion for the week ahead. And I'll hear more often than not, it's like, I came to this meeting feeling one way, but I'm leaving feeling great. I'm leaving feeling way better than I was when I got here. And it's all through that act of not only being vulnerable oneself and sharing what's going on, what's alive and real for you in that moment, but it's also knowing that there's all these other guys that are just there to hear. There's no feedback. There's no cross coaching or cross talk. Simply we're holding space for a guy to share. Because what I found was most of us just don't have a place to do that. We don't. Or if we do, it's like going to the pub, having a few beers with the guys, but we all know 1-2 rounds in, I mean, where's that conversation really go? At least from my experience, you know, it was, I didn't really get anything from that. There wasn't really lifelong value from that interaction. And so, you know, back to this idea, it's yes, once they get there and they start practicing it, they realize, you know, I can do this. Not only I can do this with other men, and it's okay, it's safe, and I actually feel really good for this. And what will happen is, and this is what I've experienced through my own life, is it starts to trickle over into everything else that you do in a positive way. You know, it's made me a more effective father. It's made me, as I'll say, a better dad, a better husband, a better business partner, a better entrepreneur. Like, honestly, it's improved me in every area of my life. And it didn't happen overnight, but it gradually just, it was progress. Similar to what you said earlier, you know, back in the day, I used to want everything to be perfect, but I was like, I got to get rid of the perfection syndrome, because I just want to have a progress syndrome. You know, as long as I'm looking forward and I'm seeing progress, things are going the right direction, you know? And so, yeah, that's it. Like, so, you know, I can't give you a black and white answer that, oh yeah, now they're able to be much more vulnerable with their family, but we do see that, but we're all on different timelines. We all have different comfort levels, but it doesn't mean that we shouldn't be practicing, you know, and at least having a space that you can go to once a week, and you know that you can practice that skill and just get stuff off your chest that maybe you don't feel you have anybody else in your life that you can share that stuff with. And believe me, Lucy, we celebrate wins as well. Like, as a man, and I don't know, you know, maybe when you talk to your husband and sons, you can see if they ever get this feeling. But when I'm around a lot of my close friends, like, sometimes I would find that I'm shy, or I don't want to talk about some of the successes I'm experiencing in life, because out of fear that there might be some judgment. They might see that as me trying to be, you know, a bit of a peacock, you know, like trying to brag. And it's not the point. It's just, I want to share some of these big things that have happened, you know, like, this is exciting stuff. Just like I want to hear your wins in your life too. Share these just to acknowledge it and be acknowledged, be heard, be seen. And that we're missing. We are missing that, you know, because there's always this fear. I would be like, a guy would do that, and I would find myself like feeling competitive, feeling animosity. Like, why you? Why not me? And I was like, this is such a negative feeling, and it's so crippling. Like, I don't like this. It's impeding the quality of connection that I'm having in my life with anybody. Yeah. And I was like, I can't have this anymore. You know, I can't. I'm feeling more and more disconnected with my own life, and it's because I don't have any of these solid relationships where I feel I can be open and be who I am. You know, and so I don't know if that answers your question or if it creates more questions.
Well, you mentioned competition, and you know, for me, whenever I hear of competition, it's generally because we're coming from the scarcity mindset.
Sure. Yeah.
But you also mentioned intention, and I wanted to come back to that, because for me, when I think of the intention behind vulnerability, you know, whenever I share something personal about myself on the podcast, about my journey from, you know, being at the bottom, the rock bottom, to where I am today, the reason why I share those, and, you know, for me, my story is incredibly painful, like anybody's rock bottom story is incredibly painful, but I share it because I remember the loneliness I felt at that moment. I felt completely alone. I didn't know how to be vulnerable, and I didn't know how to ask for help. So for me, I always share those vulnerable moments in the hopes of creating a connection with somebody else. Is that your mindset behind it? Yeah,
absolutely. Like, so here's the thing about vulnerability. It always takes somebody to go first. Right? I mean, we think about it like you're in a situation, maybe you're just starting to form that relationship for the first time with somebody. And we always are looking for common ground, right? Isn't that how relationships start? There's usually a common interest, a common attraction, a common desire to want to know that person a bit better. But for us to truly get to know each other, we have to be vulnerable. Like, we have to be like, you have to be willing to divulge something about yourself, about your life, about your profession, about your family. Like, if you want true connection to be created. So we do practice levels of vulnerability in our life, but to what depth is really the question, right? And to what, when I say what question, or sorry, what depth do we want to go? Like, it really is asking ourselves, well, how connected do I want to be? What kind of conversations do I want to have? And, you know, I am the first person that'll admit that I've struggled a lot with this. Like, how much is too much? You know, too quickly? Like, is the relationship safe enough? Is this somebody I can fully trust and be vulnerable with? Or do I truly feel like they might use this against me? And it takes a little bit of faith, you know, that in humanity, that people aren't going to turn around and use what we're sharing against us, especially if it's coming from a real struggle that we're dealing with, you know. And I was trying to think, like, circles back to ultimately, I'm giving you context to answer the question, but the question that you were asking was, sorry, I lost my train of
About
thought.
the intention and
Yeah, sorry, the
creating human
intentionality.
connection.
Yes,
Yeah.
thank you. It was a roundabout way of answering your question. Was, you know, if we have the intentions to improve on a skill, we usually set certain actions in motion to do so. You know, like,
Yeah.
we do. Like, I have an intention this year to do certain things. So I'm casting a vision, yes, but I'm also intentfully going to follow through with certain actions that I've deemed are going to get me closer to that result that I'm aiming for. Intentionality is important because it's that mental commitment we make to doing the thing. And here's the thing about vulnerability. It takes somebody to go first. But the cool thing is once the first person goes, it gives permission to anybody else or one other person, them too, to be able to now be vulnerable. And sometimes at these men's group, I noticed right at the beginning, it was like, we're all looking around the table at each other like, oh man,
I'm not going first.
Who's going first?
Yeah, exactly. You go first. I'm not doing that.
But here's the thing, Lucy, this is the coolest thing I ever saw. And we had this young guy come, like, and this is the crazy part, right? Like, when I was running these in person in Bali, we'd have this long table at a gym that I trained at. They gave us the back area to run these weekly men's groups. And, you know, I remember this one time we had, I think it was about 22 guys around the table. And we got started. We only meet for 90 minutes, but we hang out afterwards, but we have that very specific focus time for us to have these types of conversations. And I remember this young guy, it was his first time there. And one of the guys that had been around for a bit, he decided to go first that night and share something first. The young guy's eyes just like, whoa, this guy's talking about this right now? And it happened to be, and I'm not going to share the subject matter, but it was something fairly sensitive, something that this gentleman was struggling with, but also what he's been actively doing to work through it and what's been coming up for him as he's been working through it. This young guy, it just happened to be the same challenge that he's working through. Even though there's a 30-year gap between their ages, he was like, holy smokes, I'm not the only person that's dealing with this. He went next.
Wow.
And he pulled me aside after. He's like, I've never shared this with anybody. And I can't believe I just shared it with 20 plus guys around the table. And I feel great for it. It was like, because all of a sudden he realized he wasn't alone, that there's other people dealing with the same thing. And you can learn from one another. We can help each other through these things. You don't have to do it by yourself.
And it's not necessarily a case. Yeah, it's not necessarily a case of fixing someone, because I think that's what we get caught up in, that is that when somebody shares, and this is, you know, a bad habit of mine, is that I'm an empath. So I see somebody hurting and I want them to feel better. I want to fix it.
Yes, right.
And a lot of the time when people are sharing their feelings, they just want you to hold the space so that they're heard.
Spot on. That's right.
And
they just want to be heard and seen. That's it.
You really have to fight that urge.
Yeah.
Not to jump in and say, we'll do this, this, and this, or I got this book and I got this. And it's something I still have to work at because, you know, especially as a mom, there's nothing worse, even though my kids are adults, there's nothing worse than seeing your child struggle. I mean, I would trade, you know, their struggles any day, just so if I could take them and just so they didn't have to go through that pain. But I have to remind myself that that is their journey.
Yes.
And if I jump in and immediately try to fix everything, then I'm depriving them of their own learning and growth journey.
That's so wise the way you said that. And I can just imagine there's lots of people listening or watching this, like nodding their head right now. Like, yes,
I do
yes,
that.
yes. I do that too. You know,
I've gotten
absolutely.
very good at pinpointing my faults. I have several, and I never used to be, because, and again, this comes to vulnerability, is I grew up in a home that if you were wrong, you were made fun of.
Oh yeah. That makes it really hard going on a limb, huh? Yeah,
so
geez.
I would argue until I was blue in the face, even though at the back of my mind, I knew it was probably wrong. I would not back down, because that would be vulnerable and that would be showing a weakness. I was wrong. You can't be wrong. You can't change your mind. So, it's something that I continually work at, because, I don't like seeing people hurt, but I have to remind myself that I have to allow them the space to have their own journey, just like I've had the space to have my journey over the last 4 years.
Powerful. I mean, it's a wonderful place to come from. And I can imagine that's a big part of the inspiration and motivation for doing what you do, and I think it's wonderful. We need more of it in the world. Keep having these conversations, right? And it's but back to the language side of things, because it really, a lot of what we're talking about, is it a bit the semantics? For sure, it's our relationships with language, but more so concepts. Even I'd go as far as to say a philosophy, if you will, and it's being able to recognize that maybe there's certain skills that are underdeveloped in us. It doesn't mean we're broken, because it's not a matter of fixing this. None of us need to be fixed, because none of us are broken. But we may not have the experiences to date in our lives, or have had the opportunity to have the experiences or connection with people to help us learn how to do it. And it's not a weakness to admit that, to say, hey, I really want to be able to do this, but I have no idea how to get started. Anybody out there, give me some advice on this? And we are very fortunate, because we are in just an amazing point in history. I mean, COVID aside and everything else in the world, politically speaking, I don't want to go there, but from a humanity standpoint, we've never had so much access to information before.
Yeah.
Ever. So, as I said, I've gotten a few degrees from the University of YouTube, and all kidding aside, there's amazing opportunities to get the support if we're willing to just say, what, I need a little bit of help. And it's amazing when we put our hand forward to ask for support or help, there's always somebody on the other end extending a hand back to help, if you allow yourself to go there, and for the longest time, I fought it. And then as soon as I said, what, I keep doing this for everybody else, because I found it really easy. I love helping everybody else. But when it came to asking for help, to get help from me, I wouldn't do it. Oh, guilty. There's a lot of us, like, this is very, very common, like super common, to the point that it's embarrassing how common it is, and that we don't talk about it more. It's like this little elephant in the room that we're like, yeah, it's over there, but we don't talk about that. But it's literally that. And again, it's a skill. And it's also, you have to be able to reason through it and realize, what, when I do this, I'm actually safe. Nothing bad happened. I didn't die. Lightning didn't strike me down. My business didn't automatically fail. My kids didn't move out and hate me. It's like, wow, all these scenarios that I painted in my mind, none of them happened. It actually was the opposite. But until you open yourself up to even trying, like you'll get caught in your own head. I used to get stuck in my head all the time, thinking about past situations that I can't change, wishing that I could, like buy Bitcoin 10 years ago. And then,
you and me both.
Yeah, I know, right? But also the anxiety about the future, right? And most of those futures that I would get anxious over never happen, ever, not even close. And yet that's where my mind would go. It's so busy, right? And that's why I'm a big advocate for meditation and exercise, because it's a great way to calm the mind and calm the energy in us. And when you do that, it opens up way more possibility, and so, yeah, I know I feel like I'm on a soapbox right now preaching, but like I'm just so passionate about this. I want everyone to have access to this, to what I'm experiencing, what I'm feeling, what I'm observing with the people I'm connecting with. And I'm just like, it's all there, it's accessible, it's just a matter of saying, hey, I want some of that,
And often whenever we start a new journey, or we are starting to create change in our life, that first step, that first teeny tiny baby step is the hardest.
Yes.
But that first step, once you take it and you realize you're not going to die, the second step is a little bit easier and a little bit easier. So
and you start to pick up speed, right?
You do. And
inertia.
those baby steps are, now I'm walking, now I'm trotting, now I'm jogging, now I'm running. For sure. Now, Di, as we wrap up, do you have any final words of wisdom or thoughts that you'd like to share with our listeners?
I've got one thing. And
okay.
I'm totally riffing on something that somebody else said over 2,000 years ago.
Okay.
The only thing that we know to be absolutely certain, like no ifs, ands, or buts, you can't argue this. It's been proven by science, but even before that, I think it's just that honest truth that we all know to be true, is that nothing stays as it is. Everything's in a change. It's always in a flux of change. We ourselves are always changing. Even when you think, I'm not going to change anymore, you're still changing. I hate to burst your bubble. But when you start to realize that nothing can stay as it is, you don't take things as seriously. And what I mean by that is even the biggest challenges, as Buddha would say, this too shall pass.
This too shall pass.
But the crazy thing, and it wasn't until one of my meditation teachers really, reframed this for me. He goes, everyone presumes that Buddha's talking about all the bad things in our life. So yeah, don't worry, you'll get through this. It will pass and things will be okay. He was talking about the great things in our lives too, because those too will pass.
Everything does.
Yeah, but this is where a lot of the suffering comes. We try to lock on to the good stuff and we don't ever want them to change, right? I mean, as parents, we know this very well. It's like, gosh, you're 6 years old. Stay like this, please. You're awesome. I love you. Don't change.
My babies.
Yes, but it happens. And we're all in that flux, right? And when you learn to be an advocate or champion of change rather than putting yourself in the victim saddle of change, gosh, life, and I hate to use the term easier, but it feels a lot simpler, because there's less resistance and there's more natural resiliency. So your ability to bounce back from those challenging situations, it just happens more automatically. And that's the part I'm most excited to help people with, is developing that inner resiliency. So it's okay, because we're all going to have low days. Come on, low months, low years. I mean, these last 2 years, pretty low for all of us. Yeah, but resiliency allows us to come back and know, what, this will pass and I'm okay. And I'm going to keep working on me. I'll keep doing what I know brings value to my life and the value of the people I love. And so that's what I want to leave people with, it's like, it's okay. Change is okay. Don't worry about it. It can be a really good thing, but especially become much, much more hyper aware of the present moment and all those amazing things that happen to you every day. So that ties back to gratitude, being appreciating what you got, because that feeling is unwavering. You when you're feeling grateful, like truly feeling grateful, there's no room for any other emotion in your life at that point in time. Like, just try it. Truly try to feel grateful for a moment and try to be sad at the same time.
Can't do it.
Like, do you know what I mean? Like, they're two completely opposing, but the one dominates it, right? Great gratitude just like crushes those negative emotions. So these are the little pieces I like to leave with anybody that's listening or watching, like center yourself around that. And I know it sounds a little bit out there. Like I years ago, this kind of language, this kind of conversation, I would have turned tail and run. Okay. As they say. Like,
oh yeah,
this is just way outside my comfort zone. So please recognize, if you're like, I can envision there's some guys that are like just cringing at some of the things I'm saying right now, right? Feeling uncomfortable. And I want to say, good. If you're feeling uncomfortable, but there's good, it means that there's something there, something worth exploring more to figure out, why do you feel so uncomfortable about this? Explore it. Be inquisitive. Be a Jacques Cousteau of your own exploration. Okay. Like, go deep, figure it out. And if you need to have some help along the way, well, hey, I'm around, and there's lots of other guys like me out there too.
So where can people connect with you and learn more about your Monday group?
Well, probably the easiest way is just reach out to me. I'm most active on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram. And the cool thing about having a very unique name, I'm so easy to find. Okay. Like I'm the only one out there with Dai Manuel. Now it's a Welsh name. Dai is D-A-I, means David. And Manuel, yes, Portuguese last name. As I say, I'm Canadian. It's all good. Don't worry about it. Like, I'm 100% Canadian. But Dai Manuel, you find me, send me a message. Let's have a conversation. Say, listen, I heard you and Lisa's conversation. I feel inspired. I'd like to check out this men's group or whatever. Just say, hey, hi. I love having conversations with people. So that's the easiest way to get a hold of me, through social. Otherwise, go to my website. I have over 1,800 articles. I've been blogging and creating content for going on 14 years now. And it's all geared towards helping people engineer their best life, right? But to have your best life, it often involves a lot of change.
So, a lot of work.
If you're not ready to change and to accept change in your life, maybe don't go to my website just yet. Let's just start with a conversation on social. But that's the easiest way to get a hold of me.
Perfect. To connect with Dai, make sure you check out the show notes. I will have all of the links in there. And Dai, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Lucy. It was absolutely amazing. And I really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Roller Coaster Podcast. Want to chat or share your ideas about today's show? Pop me an email at hello@therollercoasterpodcast.com. Don't forget to connect with me on Facebook and Instagram at The Roller Coaster Podcast. Our theme song, Roller Coaster, was performed by The Lucky Setback. Audio editing by the one and only Jeff Quigley of Quigley Creative.
Life is like a roller coaster, baby, baby. I wanna ride, 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 ride. Life is like a roller coaster, baby, baby. I wanna ride, 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 ride. Roller coaster. Ride, ride.